The morning of July 27, 1981, dawned with the deceptive clarity of a typical South Florida summer, heavy with humidity and the scent of salt air. In Hollywood, Florida, the Sears department store inside the Hollywood Mall was a sanctuary of mundane commerce, a place where families moved through aisles without a flicker of fear. Riv Walsh and her 6-year-old son Adam were among them, looking for a lamp while the boy drifted toward a display of video games. It was a fleeting moment of ordinary life, the kind of quiet Tuesday morning that anchors a childhood in safety before the world decides to tilt on its axis. No one noticed the shadows shifting in the periphery, or the subtle change in the atmosphere as a predator identified its mark in the fluorescent glow of the toy department. The transition from safety to nightmare occurred in the span of a few heartbeats, a silent rupture in the fabric of a mother's reality. When Riv returned to the spot where she had left Adam just minutes prior, the space was vacant, occupied only by the hollow electronic sounds of the Atari console. The store security had cleared out a group of older boys who were misbehaving at the kiosk, and in the confusion, Adam had been ushered out of the exit. He stood alone on the hot pavement of the parking lot, a small boy in a striped shirt and a baseball cap, suddenly separated from the only world he knew. The sun was blinding, the traffic was a dull roar, and the safety of the Sears interior was now a locked door behind him. Panic is a slow-rising tide that eventually drowns all logic, and for the Walsh family, it began as a frantic search through the aisles. Security guards and store managers moved with a casual pace that would later be haunted by the weight of their own negligence. They checked the restrooms, the stockrooms, and the garden center, calling out a name that would soon be known by every household in the United States. Outside, the Florida heat shimmered over hundreds of parked cars, any one of which could have been the vessel for a vanishing. The police were notified, but the initial response was stifled by the protocols of a time when the concept of a stranger abduction was still considered a statistical anomaly. As the first hours stretched into a grueling afternoon, the realization set in that Adam Walsh had not simply wandered off. The investigation began to peel back the layers of the Hollywood Mall, revealing a landscape that was far less secure than the public had been led to believe. Witnesses would later come forward with fragmented memories of a blue van and a man with a chillingly unremarkable face. These were the ghosts of a crime in progress, the echoes of a struggle that occurred in broad daylight while the rest of the world continued its shopping. The silence of the boy's absence was becoming a physical weight, pressing down on the Walsh home as night began to fall. John Walsh, then a hotel developer, found himself thrust into a role he never asked for, navigating a labyrinth of bureaucratic indifference and limited resources. In 1981, there was no centralized database for missing children, no national alert system, and no immediate way for police departments to share information. The search for Adam was a manual, agonizing process of printing flyers and pleading with local news outlets to give a face to the missing. Every phone call was a hope that turned into a jagged shard of disappointment, and every lead led to a dead end in the swampy outskirts. The family was trapped in a stasis of grief and adrenaline, waiting for a sign that the earth had not simply swallowed their son whole. The investigation soon shifted toward the darker elements of the Florida landscape, focusing on the drifters and transients who moved through the state like shadows. Detectives combed through records of known offenders, but the lack of digital infrastructure meant they were essentially hunting for a needle in a haystack made of paper. The psychological toll on the community was immediate. The illusion of the safe, suburban upbringing was shattered. Parents who once let their children play in the front yard now bolted their doors, watching the tree line for any sign of a blue van. The sun-drenched streets of Hollywood felt narrower, colder, and infinitely more dangerous as the search entered its second week. Deep in the Florida Everglades and along the canal banks, the search parties moved through the thick brush, guided by the grim intuition that the boy was no longer in the city. The heat was oppressive, the insects relentless, and the water murky, a perfect graveyard for secrets. Every piece of discarded clothing and every disturbed patch of earth was treated as a potential crime scene, yet the physical evidence remained elusive. The Walsh family remained in a state of suspended animation, their lives reduced to a singular, desperate objective. They were unaware that the true horror of the case was not just the abduction itself, but the sheer brutality occurring in the killer's sanctuary. The narrative of the missing child began to dominate the national consciousness, turning Adam's face into a symbol of a lost era of innocence. People looked at their own children with a new, frantic intensity, realizing that the boundary between a normal day and tragedy was thinner than a pane of glass. The authorities were under immense pressure, yet they were fighting a ghost who knew how to navigate the cracks in the system. The predator had chosen his moment perfectly, exploiting the gaps in security and the inherent trust of a child. As the days turned into 14, the hope that Adam would be found alive began to fray at the edges, replaced by a grim, unspoken certainty. Have you ever stopped to think that the videos you just watched, with flawless scripts and engaging narrations, might have been created by someone who never even touched a camera or a microphone? There is a new digital elite profiting heavily behind the scenes of YouTube and social media, building massive channels without ever showing their faces or spending thousands of dollars on equipment. While most people are frozen by the fear of being on camera, these individuals are using the hidden power of artificial intelligence to generate automated content that works and earns for them 24 hours a day. The secret to dominating this game isn't about having a famous face. It's about knowing how to command the right tools to create scripts, voices, and visuals that magnetically hold the audience's attention. I've gained access to a strategic method that reveals the exact roadmap for you to build your own invisible digital empire. Mastering AI to turn clicks into a real source of income. It is the perfect opportunity for those seeking financial and geographical freedom without having to deal with the pressure of being a public figure on the internet. Best of all, you can seize this opportunity right now for a symbolic price. The complete training is under an exclusive promotion, dropping from $97 to just $17. This is your passport to unlocking the knowledge you need to start your professional journey with AI today. Click the first link in the description to secure your spot while this discount is still active. On August 10, 1981, the agonizing wait for the Walsh family ended in a way that would leave a permanent scar on the American psyche. Two fishermen, casting their lines into a drainage canal along the Florida Turnpike, spotted something floating in the brackish water. It was not the boy they found, but a severed head, the only remains of Adam Walsh that the predator had seen fit to leave behind. The discovery was so horrific that it transcended a simple criminal report, becoming a moment of national trauma that redefined safety. The rest of Adam's body would never be recovered, consigned to the depths of the Florida wilderness or the calculated cruelty of his killer. The identification of the remains brought a definitive, crushing end to the search, but it opened a chasm of questions. The brutality suggested a perpetrator with a profound level of depravity, someone who viewed a 6-year-old child as an object to be destroyed. The forensics of the era were primitive, and the water had reclaimed much of the evidence that could have pointed to a suspect. The investigation was now a hunt for a murderer, a ghost who had traveled over 100 miles from the scene of the abduction. The sun-bleached landscape of Vero Beach became a site of pilgrimage for a grieving nation, a place where innocence had been slaughtered. Suspicion eventually fell upon Otis Toole, a drifter and self-proclaimed serial killer who was already in custody for other heinous crimes. Toole's confessions were a labyrinth of contradictions, filled with grisly details that seemed to match the evidence, yet frequently shifting. He claimed to have picked up the boy at the mall, driven him north, and committed the act in a fever of senseless violence. However, the lack of physical evidence and his history of false confessions made the authorities hesitant to officially close the book. Toole was a man who lived in the filth of society's margins, a companion to the notorious Henry Lee Lucas. His involvement brought a layer of grime to the case that seemed impossible to wash away, leaving the investigation stalled for many agonizing years. For years, the case remained in a state of legal limbo, with Toole confessing and then recanting, teasing the Walsh family with the truth. John Walsh transformed his grief into a weapon, becoming the most prominent advocate for victims' rights in the history of the United States. He realized that Adam's death was a symptom of a systemic failure, a lack of coordination and urgency that allowed predators to flourish. This resolve led to the creation of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the launch of America's Most Wanted. The psychological impact on the American family cannot be overstated. The stranger danger era was born from the blood spilled in that Florida canal. The freedom of the 1970s vanished overnight, replaced by a culture of surveillance and hypervigilance. Every mall became a place of potential peril, every unidentified van a harbinger of doom. The legislation that followed ensured that Adam's name would be etched into the law, providing tools for future investigations that were tragically denied to him. In the 1990s, Otis Toole died in prison, taking the final, absolute truth of the Adam Walsh case to his grave. It wasn't until 2008, 27 years after the abduction, that the Hollywood Police Department officially named Toole as the definitive killer. The announcement brought a semblance of closure, but it was a cold comfort for a family that had spent decades in the shadow of a monster. The errors of the initial investigation, the lost evidence, and ignored witnesses could not be undone by a late admission. The site of the abduction at the Hollywood Mall has changed over the years, the Sears long gone and the corridors renovated. But for those who remember, the air still feels heavy near the old exit where a boy once stood alone, waiting for a mother who would never reach him. The Florida sun continues to beat down on the pavement, indifferent to the tragedies that have unfolded beneath its glare. The story of Adam Walsh is the moment when America realized that monsters were standing right behind us in the checkout line. Even today, the details of what occurred during that drive from Hollywood to Vero Beach remain a subject of dark fascination. Some believe Toole did not act alone, or that the true killer was never questioned, a shadow that moved on to other victims in other states. The severed remains are a brutal punctuation mark on a life that was barely allowed to begin, a reminder of the fragility of our boundaries. The legacy of the case is seen in every code, atom, and every Amber Alert that flashes on a smartphone today. These are the echoes of a 6-year-old's final cry, a signal sent across time to prevent another child from vanishing into the Florida heat. As we look at the old footage of the Walsh family, the sense of dread remains as potent as it was decades ago. The malls are brighter now, the cameras are everywhere, and the laws are stronger. But the darkness that waited in Hollywood is still out there. It is patient and silent, watching for the next moment of distraction in the bright Florida sun. If this deep dive into the shadows of history resonated with you, consider subscribing to Dark Florida and leaving a like. Your support allows us to continue unearthing the stories the world tried to forget. Would you like me to generate a script for a different high-profile Florida case?